Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. So I'm going to do a series of videos, and I've already done a couple of them already. But what we're going to do is, obviously, when there's controversial topics spoken in Islam about Islam, you have long videos. They can go to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, explaining certain issues in Islam and how do you respond to that. But what we're going to do is I'm going to make these short videos where we discuss certain controversial issues to help Muslims better equip themselves when always engaging with the non-Muslim, because the non-Muslims are already always bringing these topics relating to apostasy, relating to sexual intimacy with minors, all these claims, and then things like slavery and concubines and all of these issues. And what do Muslims do? What do they refer to? So what I want you to do is share these videos, and I'm going to make quick points. And if you want a in-depth analysis and detail where we talk about these issues, visit the longer video in this description section. I'll put the link below this here, and you can go listen to it. But there's going to be some people who don't want to listen to very long-winded videos. So what I'm going to do in this video is just drop a few points on how to combat certain issues and things made against Islam, criticisms leveled against Islam. So this video is going to be specifically about slavery. Quick points. How do you engage this? So the first thing that you need to say to a non-Muslim: do not ever mix up the colonial understanding of slavery and equate that with Islam, because there is a complete difference between the two in the way you treat your slaves. So in the colonial method, there were no boundaries. They would beat their slaves severely. They would do many torturous behaviors and all of these things in order to control their slaves and so forth. So this sort of behavior is completely barbaric and unethical, and it should not be ever equated with Islam. And how do we know this? Because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this in many of the hadiths about the treatment of slaves, and I will put a hyperlink below this video because I don't want to make it long, where it goes into all of these details about how to treat those slaves. It's very, very simple. You can go and read it and see it, that you should, some of the hadiths actually mention you should treat them as your brother. You should feed them from where you're being fed, where you are eating from. Not, oh, I'm superior, I eat from a certain plate, I eat a certain dish while you get the leftovers and all that sort of stuff. So this sort of concept is a lie, and it has nothing to do with Islam. In fact, there is even cases in Islam where, for instance, someone mistreated his slave or beat his slave, and so he was ransomed. He was basically set free. The Prophet said that this slave is no longer legally obligated to be under your care. And so, yeah, he was dismissed from having a slave. So what we need to first clear up is this misconception that slaves are like the way the colonialists treat their slaves. It is completely different. The second point is, this is the second point that you need to understand, is that slaves, they were taken during a lot of the wars, and the reason why they were taken during wars is because it would be a tactic of war that when you invade and the army is bigger than you and stronger than you, is that the advantage of taking slaves of the enemy is because you can use them for to save your own population and army from going into extinction. So this was why it was vital for an army to go and capture the army And in war, obviously, there's deaths and there's killings. And so when and of course, the Prophet ﷺ said, do not kill the women and the children and the non-enemy combatants. So can you take the non-enemy combatants as slaves? Yes, but you can only use them for certain purposes, and that is to, if you need to use them to free hostages, for instance. This is a good tactic of war, and we've already pointed out Israel does this too. Israel goes into a town, takes many hostages, and uses them to get Hamas to release hostages. So for prison exchange purposes. The second advantage of that is to help build your infrastructure and help it to grow. They can work under you and you can provide for them. You can provide shelter and food, and you can make them live in your house. This is going to be beneficial. And even in the West, for instance, they have these certain rules where, well, not certain rules, but certain things where you can, instead of paying rent, you can actually go and live in someone's house. You can eat from it. You can use the electricity. You can use the gas and all, and you can use all the utilities. You can sleep there, but the obligation you have is you need to maintain the house, do the gardening, do the cleaning, do this, do that. So people do this. Now, of course, the Westerner would say, oh no, but that's his choice. And when it comes to Islam, you're going into a country, there's war, there's invasion, and then you're taking these people and you're forcing them to live under this sort of circumstance. Uh, and they say that this is different. This is still different. And the counter argument to that is, what do we then do with these people? Is a better option to slaughter them? Because if you let them go, they're going to join the war to fight and kill you, right? So Daniel Hakikato, mashallah, he's already responded to this as well, and he's made the point that yes, if you let them go, then they're going to join and kill you, which is going to be worse. So it's better that without their will, you force them to stay and you commit them to certain works and duties, and in favor, they get certain duties. So they get certain benefits like having shelter, having care, and eating and being looked after, well treated in that aspect. It's like a give and take relationship. Now, and they may turn around and say, but what about the women? Why can't you just let the women go? They're not going to join. And I already spoke about keeping the women, and the keeping the women is, again, to keep your own survival, keep your own population up. The more women you have, the more you can then grow as a population, because these women will then fall pregnant, and then your numbers will increase. And if you didn't do that, what happens is you then become extinct, right? You could be wiped out. In order to sustain your empire, in order to sustain your existence, is to procreate. And if you don't procreate, then this is going to cause your civilization's extinction. And so that's what was happening with a lot of these minority groups, Muslim groups, who are outnumbered by vast majority of the opposition, of the enemy, who's about to mercilessly just kill and exterminate all of them. These Muslim armies had to grow up to take then enemy combatants, kill them, and then if the women and the non-enemy combatants of the men, you take them as slaves, and what happens is you then grow as a superpower, and you start surviving and procreating. And if you didn't do this, then this will be your extinction. And no atheist or secularist can actually argue against this point. So you may say, well, that's evil. Yes, it is, but we got to pick the better of the two evils. Do you choose extinction, or do you take slaves and then you extend your population by procreating, because don't forget that the Islamic principle is, when we go to war, we don't kill the women and children. But when the enemies come, the first things that they did was kill the women and the children, right? They killed the women and children. So not only was because they didn't have the principles of not killing the women and the children, and we see this in Israel as well. Don't give me this nonsense. Oh, in our modern world, we care about women and children. No, you don't. You go and just destroy. You send a nuclear warhead, and you can destroy everything, like you've done in Japan. We see what you've done in Israel. Targeting the women and the children, and then saying, "Oh, Hamas is using them as human shields." Well, if Hamas is using them as human shields, why are you doing? What are you? There should be no excuse then for you to kill the women and the children. And so when you're killing the women and the children, there's no remorse. Now, you wouldn't do that if they were Jews. If Hamas was holding Jews as human shields, women and children, you wouldn't kill the women and children. The women and children, you'd send in special forces. So when you understand that their objective is to kill the women and children, it's even more so important that you take from the enemy combatants, concubines, and many Western empires, even in the past, took concubines. You look at even biblical or Judeo-Christianity, they actually took concubines. Something like Solomon had something like 800 concubines. So it was actually a normal practice. And so it is more incumbent on Muslims to actually take the concubines, to take them as captives, because not only are you running out of your own women, because the enemy is coming in and killing your women and your children, right? Now you literally don't have any women to grow your population, because the non-Muslims are coming in, they're killing your women and children. So now it's become even more important for you to take the concubines from their armies, from their countries, when you go to war with them. And then they say, "Oh, but that's sex slaves. That's unethical. That's sex slaves. That's unethical, and that's like rape and so forth. That's against the will of a human being." These are the arguments that they will make. And so how do you respond to that? Okay, so the response can be followed as this. If you were given the same opportunity to not allow your population to go extinct, and if you only had the choice of forcefully growing your population by force, would you do that, or would you rather go extinct? That would be my response to them. Which would you choose? Would you rather force yourself upon these women, or would you then go into extinction? Of course, they'd say their objective is to commit the lesser of the two evils. So the same now goes to the way the West, for instance, they've taken slaves from Africa, right? And so they would say, although they would object to this in our modern age, although they'll object and say this was wrong, this is against human ethical standards, you can't force someone to do something they don't want to do, where we live in a different time now, there's different standards, we shouldn't force anyone to do anything like this, but it's convenient for the Westerners to say this, because they've built their nation on the backs of slaves. They've built their railway system, their infrastructure. They built it on the blacks. They've built their agriculture on farming, and they built their nation on this. And they used the blacks to do this while they were concentrating on other things, on other useful things like science and medicine and military engineering and the Industrial Revolution, and they were able to do all these other things. And so the question is, a lot of these Westerners would say, well, you know what, slavery did exist, we're not happy with that, but you know what? In 200 years, we built our country. If it wasn't for the black slave trade, if it wasn't for, us expanding into the indigenous population and killing them and then establishing our white Western civilization, then we wouldn't bring progress to these people. We wouldn't expand. We wouldn't be where we are today, which means we are an economic powerhouse and so forth. So notice the inconsistency. On one hand, they would say it was wrong, but on another hand, they'll boast about saying, well, if that didn't happen, then we wouldn't be where we are today. And so the question remains, if there's a big war, and suppose we go back, if Western civilization went back to those very early beginnings, all these people talking about human rights and how about human empathy, suppose they were given the same situation where they had to build their country again, but they couldn't afford to pay wages. All they could offer in return is giving housing, maybe some food to eat and so forth, but in return they expected free labor. Right? Do you think that they wouldn't go back into Africa and then take those people again and then bring them back to America and rebuild it again? Of course they would. Of course they would. So when it's all good, when they've built their country, then they start going against slavery, and they're all about human ethics and humanism and human rights. But when the situation changes and they become corrupt, everything's corrupted or bankrupted, and they have to start again, then they will again appeal to those very evils because they believe in the greater good out of these evils, because at the end of the day the greater good is going to be established no matter how many people die, no matter how many people get abused. The greater good is we are going to bring Western civilization back, even if that means that human rights are going to be violated. And if there's any Christian objecting to this, you can go have a look. Moses, according to the Bible, in Numbers 31, when he went to the war with the Amalekites, you can go 1 Samuel 15:3 as well. You have a look that not only did they take the animals, not only did they kill the men, they took the women as concubines. 32 of them were even tributed and given to a priest. What did they do with these girls? Did they just keep them there as decoration? No, they married them. They waited something like 30 days and then married them after killing their parents and so forth. So this is actually biblically inspired. So any Christian shaking their head, well, if you're shaking your head at me, then you're gonna have to give up your Bible. You need to give up your Bible right away. And this nonsense about human rights and so forth, these people will force anything on anyone, even in the West, right? Even when it came to the COVID vaccine. Do you remember when they forced everyone to take the COVID vaccine, and if anyone refused, their jobs were terminated. They were sacked from their jobs. This happened in Australia. Literally, this happened in Australia. And a lot of these humanists said, no, you should line up, because if we're all vaccinated, then we can then eradicate this virus and so forth. It doesn't matter if the government is forcing you to take the vaccine, which is against your freedom of choice and your will. Then you need to be forced to take this injection. You need to be forced to put these chemicals in your body. because despite that having health warnings and health effects, because we need to do the greater good. We need to eradicate the greater evil, and that is that virus. So there was no, you didn't have these humanist movements coming out and saying we should object, it's going against our human will. And I mean, you did have some patches here and there come up, but overwhelming majority of the people were for the vaccine. And they didn't care whether, you're forced to do it. And we were forced to do it. And if anyone says you weren't forced, they're lying to you. We were forced because we were given the option. Either you get the vaccine or you get sacked, right? That's what happened at my job. My manager, for example, was sacked because he didn't get the vaccine. He didn't get the booster shot and so forth. He didn't get any of this, and they sacked him for it. So what happened to human rights abuses there? So then why the double standards? If the greater harm for Muslims is to be exterminated, if that's a greater harm, and to repel that harm, if we're trying to beat that virus, which is the opposing enemy, and if that means to take their women as captives and marry them and then have children, whether it's part of their will or not, and you're saying, oh, that's against human rights, well, then the COVID vaccine, forcing me to take the COVID vaccine is against human rights, but I don't see you complaining because we eradicated the virus. Again, if Muslims have eradicated the enemy, then what's the big issue now? Now they can live in peace. What's the greater goal has been achieved. And I know what people will try and do. They'll try and frame you. They'll be like, you are a rape apologist. You are a rape. How dare you? You should get charged. Blah, 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 this and that. So this is what they'll do now, the Westerners, in order to silence your criticism. But you can always respond and say, no, I am not ever condoning that someone, a Muslim man in the streets living in the West, should randomly go and assault and rape a non-Muslim, or even a Muslim for that matter. I'm not condoning that. This is against Islam. We don't just randomly go and rape someone. No, that is completely different from being in a war case scenario, where you're going as an army to another foreign, or you're protecting your borders, or there's a war between the borders, and then you're in war, you're in a state of war, people have died, and then the women and the children have been left behind. You can't just leave them so they become just public property. Someone needs to take care of them. Then you bring them back to the Muslim civilization, the Muslim country, and so forth. And then there are marriage ceremonies. There'll be a marriage ceremony. And in some cases, if you are married and so forth, and you want to take a concubine and look after her and care for her, because it's all about caring for her, providing for her, feeding her and stuff like that, and clothing her, and looking after her. And then you can have children with her as well. And by the way, if she actually has your child, she then automatically becomes your wife. So she becomes your wife. So then, so this isn't just, randomly just grab someone from the street, rape them, and that's it, to hurt them. No, this has nothing to do with that. The context that I'm talking about is concubines, and this is where you can procreate with them, and have children with them, and help preserve your population from going into extinction. That is different than just randomly grooming, or just going into the street, randomly raping a girl and then leaving her on the street like she's some trash, and then you just carry on with your life. No. This is completely against Islam, and we are not ever condoning this sort of behavior, and anyone who supports this sort of behavior and these grooming gangs, under even Islamic law, are to be punished, even through execution. And we also need to understand that in this time and age, Westerners constantly bring up this issue with slavery, but where does it actually happen now? I mean, we're pretty much all built up now. We don't need to go back to these tactics unless you are a minority, maybe like what Hamas did and so forth. Maybe you've taken captives to do a prison exchange with Israel and so forth. And Israel does the same back, mind you. They do exactly the same thing back. But realistically speaking, when you have a look, Muslims are not practicing these practices. That happened in a very long time ago. Times have changed, times are different, and you can put many other strategical plans instead of taking slaves. So again, we're not encouraging slavery. We're not even remotely encouraging this. It's only when the situation becomes so so catastrophic that the Muslims are almost going into extinction, or they are a very small minority, that they have to use these tactics to prolong their existence. So this isn't just, to be honest with you, I don't believe it would even be applicable in this day and age where, Muslims aren't going to go extinct. We have over 1.6 billion followers. We're not obviously going to go into extinction. So this was more or less for the start of civilization, where the numbers were very, very small compared to what they are today. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, and the Quran always mentions, the benefits of freeing slaves. It is probably the only book that mentions this. Now, I'm not trying to brush this aside and say it completely dismisses it being applicable today. No, because you might have a coalition of nations wanting to exterminate. Like, for instance, just imagine if, say, 50 countries came together and tried to exterminate Afghanistan, right? Imagine that happen. So if they all came to try and exterminate Afghanistan, then this would be a more legitimate reason for the Afghan army, that when they're fighting to take captives of war and using these women slaves and men slaves for their benefit, the men could work for them and so forth, and the women can obviously help them procreate, and then that way they won't go into extinction. So I'm not making the argument that it is that a scenario could not occur in our modern age. It definitely could, but it is not the standard. It is not the standard for this day and age. The other argument that I wanted to make is about human ethics, about human rights, regarding to the issues of slavery, and how moral values can change depending on the circumstance. Regarding taking women as captives, and as they call it, sexual slavery and things like this. If you have a look at, for example, atheism, if you just look at atheism, and you propose them the question, right? A great think tank for the atheist community, was it Sam Harris? Sam Harris spoke about this, and he spoke about how there may be a circumstance where there is a form of rape that is beneficial, which actually helped drive the diversity of life. Imagine this, an atheist is saying, a secular liberalist atheist is talking about rape being beneficial in the evolutionary process, because if another animal didn't force itself on another animal, then we wouldn't have life. We wouldn't have the diversity of life and so forth. So he spoke about how there were times where it is uncomfortable talking about it, but there were times where rape was actually beneficial in order to start life. And I always use this argument because it comes back to this point. If you had, suppose a comet hit the Earth, most of the vegetation, everything pretty much died. Human beings were going into extinction. There was one man and one woman on the face of the Earth. One man, one woman. That's it. Now, if these two people did not procreate, then we're going to go into extinction. Okay? Suppose the woman said, "No, it's my freedom of right. I don't want to do this." Now, what would be the greater of the two evils? Human beings go to extinction, or this man forces himself on this woman, and then she has a child, and so forth. So, of course, people object and say, well, yes, it's against her human rights and so forth, but you know what? There is something called less of the two evils. It's better that he forces himself onto her in order to procreate, and so forth, and bring back the existence of humankind and so forth. And the same applies to the animal world. If you had two rhinoceroses, and these two rhinoceroses had absolutely no interest in having intimacy, then perhaps there will be some sort of a force where the scientists will come together and try and force these animals to have intimacy in order to have a baby rhino, so rhinos don't go extinct, for instance. They wouldn't talk about, oh, you're encouraging these animals, one animal to rape another, this is unethical and so forth, blah, blah, blah. No, they would say, well, yes, it is against our human rights and our values, but in this sort of circumstance, we rather have a rhino than have rhinos not go extinct, than to momentarily hurt the feeling of the female rhino, for instance. So these values of human rights always change depending on the circumstance. Like, you're a vegetarian because everything is good. You've got all these options. You're like, oh, you believe in animal rights. You believe that animals and humans have the same feelings, and we shouldn't murder animals. But then when war happens, when you lose all your crops, you're going into starvation, then you're saying, well, I'll just eat animals because it's about my survival. But what happened? I thought you were equal. Right? I thought you were equal. So why are you only thinking about your survival? Why don't you think about theirs? I'll only think about my survival. Why you think? I thought you all shared the same feelings and you're all equal. So it goes to show that yes, these vegans or these humanists will always say this is human rights, this is how we should behave, only when it's good, but then when things turn pear-shaped, they will then go against their own values. So another example would be the feminist movement, how they'll talk about human rights and how men are equal to women and women are equal to men and there's no difference. And women can always do the things men can do, and there should be no discrimination between men and women. Women should be able to do the things that men do. But then when you look at Ukraine, when Ukraine went to war with Russia, it was only mandatory for Ukrainian men to stay back and fight. It was only optional for women. Even if you were single and you had no children to take care of, you're a single girl, you didn't have any elders to look after, you were also given the option. It wasn't mandatory for you to stay back and fight. If you want, you could leave. You can leave the country. But the men didn't have that option. They had to stay back and fight. They had to literally stay back and fight. And so what happened was you didn't see the feminist movement come out and defend the rights of men to say, why is there sexism, discrimination? You didn't accuse the Ukrainian government and Zelensky, President Zelensky, of being a misogynist patriarchy, did you? No, you didn't. You kept your mouth shut. You keep your mouth shut and you did not say a word, because those men are now fighting for your survival while you're sipping your chai latte and shopping at your nice your luxury store and getting your massage done. You've got Ukrainian husbands, fathers and sons dying for your own survival, right? And so what happened? Why the double standards? Why the hypocrisy? So the reason why I'm expressing this, I'm showing you how, yes, the morals will change depending on the circumstance. So today they're saying, yes, we should not allow anyone to force themselves on another woman. But then when war happens, and you're going extinct, then the circumstances will obviously change. If the world is about to end and you're the only couple on the face of the earth, the circumstance will again change as well. If you're a vegan and a bomb happens and the whole vegetation explodes and you don't have time to grow crops, and you need food to eat straight away, and you don't have rice farms, or you don't have things to eat, then you will then start to eat animals for your survival. So don't allow these Westerners to ever dictate and play with you that their moral values are moral values and they stick by their moral values and humanist values. No, their humanist values can be one value and one rule today, and then they can literally flip on that same principle. I know I didn't want to make this video long, but I'm trying to make it as short as possible. It is a big subject, but a lot of things have to be clarified, unfortunately. My other videos go a very long time, but I want to make this, again, as short as possible. And the shortest possible I could get is just under 40 minutes. And this is the last point I'll make regarding this point. The West did not rule out slavery. And the West did not rule out any of these things. They've just changed the terms. If you have a look at the prison system, they've got forced labor. They've got forced labor even in the prison system in America, where people in the prison are there to do work labor. So this is a form of slavery. If you even look at the Western system, if you don't pay 30% of your tax, you could go to jail. So if you want to have a good living standards, you need to pay the government tax. And if you don't pay the government tax, you're basically trying to stay alive. You're basically working to stay out of jail, basically, because you need to earn a living. And if you don't pay your tax, they could punish you. They could throw you in jail. And this is actually a form of modern slavery. Now, people say, oh, but the taxes that we pay, we have to pay those because they actually benefit us. How do you think we get our roads built? How do you think we get medical exemptions? And how do we get looked after here? And our taxes go to pay for weapons to protect us from enemies and things like that. I mean, that's no different from a colonialist taking a black slave into his house and saying, listen, I'm going to take you as a slave, but you're going to get benefits out of it. I've got a gun here. If anyone tries to break into the house, I'm going to protect you. If you need any medical expenses, if you've got any medical expenses, I'm going to pay for them. So that's all covered. If if you need any food to eat, I'm going to cover that. If you need shelter, I'm going to, the all the labor that you provide, these are, just see this as like a tax, because this is going to provide for you. This is going to look after you in the sense that you don't have to pay for your medical expenses. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to put a roof over your head. You've got no utility bills and so forth. So it's basically the same thing, right? Now, they might turn around and say, oh, it's not the same thing, because if we don't want to pay tax and be enslaved to the tax, then we won't get a job. But then the question arises, okay, fair enough, you won't get a job, but now where is your living standard, right? You've got no income, what are you going to do? You're going to try and work cash in hand, but that's really illegal in most places as well. So again, it's not going to be a beneficial living standard for you. So all these people walking around and acting, they're all enslaved to the system, right? They're all dictated by the system. But but when it comes to Islam, oh, Islam is barbaric. Islam still believes in medieval slavery and all this sort of stuff. And very lastly, I want to mention, these people are the last people to talk about slavery in Islam and Muslims and their sexual slavery, this predatorial behavior. They're going to war, they're taking these women to have sexual slavery with them and to marry them forcefully and all this sort of stuff. But you look at the West, just be an observer, look at the West, right? Look at the way really we Muslims, we actually treat our wives. If you have a look, instead of listening to Fox and BBC and all this garbage, right? You look at the way the Muslim house is, the happiness, how we're having lots of children, we're growing as a community, we're not beating our wives, we're not doing those things. These are, if you're religious, if you understand your religion. I'm not talking the ones who have fallen off the faith and who are abusing their wives, and that happens. And it happens in all cultures. You go have a look, even in the West, 1 in 4 women are being violently abused in the West. 1 in 4 women are being violently abused. Can you imagine? This is in Australia, for example. In fact, there's even a saying that says that they would rather trust to be alone with a bear in a forest than to be alone with a man. This is coming from the feminists. Who are they talking about? They're talking about Muslim men only? No, they're talking about their own mankind, because there's so much rape and there's so much sexual exploitation. There is so much degeneracy, treating women as just a byproduct, like she's just a zoo exhibit animal that they could just go and rape and abuse and so forth. This sexual exploitation is happening. Now, you may say this is against the law, but your culture says something different, because culturally you have a systemic problem in this. 1 in 4, it says 1 in 4 women have been abused. And so what's happening in these societies? And so when we look at the Muslim families and the way they're treated, we don't have those cases, 1 in 4. Like, that's unheard of. And where you do have that is probably in a country that there's war and there's all of this destabilization, unrest. Maybe there was an invasion, maybe there's a lot of corruption, maybe there's no law and order. But you have a look where you have law and order in the West, and you're getting these high numbers. Now, there's something really going wrong. So how dare you talk about the Muslim household? The man is the oppressor, the man is this, the man is that. And how shameless that you speak about women's rights. Where has your moral values of women's rights led you to? OnlyFans. You got women on OnlyFans trying to break records. These are white women trying to break records, how many men they can sleep with. And you want to talk about human rights? You want to talk about how you, the West, are the pinnacle of giving human rights? How dare you, how shamelessly dare you even say that when you sexually exploit women? Oh, that's a choice. It's funny how you say, oh, well, at least they have a choice. But then on their choices, you call them whores, you call them degenerates, you call them how can they shamelessly do this, right? You give them the validation to do what they want, and then you hypocritically accuse them of being whores, of being, degrading and so forth. So what do you do that then? Why do you shame these women who do these things, right? So on one hand, it's like you play the devil's advocate. You're like, yeah, we believe in choices. Women can do whatever they want. And then when they do whatever they want, then you shame them. It's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? So in Islam, I'm glad that, there is this, forcing them a dress code. There is, because we're upholding our values. And when you don't do this, then what happens? The other end of the spectrum is you have all these women trying to break records, sleeping with as much men, and publishing it all over social media. This affects their family. This affects society growing up. As a whole, society is all affected by this. Their kids get bullied at school because their mums are on social media and their pictures are displayed everywhere. It causes all other evils as well. Some of these women get their pictures taken, and then they are ransomed. Bribes happen. They say, well, now we're going to publish all your pictures online if you don't do us this or that. And it causes a lot of problems for these people. And I think that's why a lot of these Western men are sick of a lot of the feministic women movements, because they're like, we've had enough. We've had enough of this. Because they're all obnoxious. And so they're going and marrying women from Southeastern Asian countries. Interesting. Because they're like, oh, they're a bit more conservative and they're not so out there like our Western women. And you have their population decreasing because they're no longer having big families, they're no longer getting married, they're prolonging marriage, they're either turning into LGBTIQ, so they have all of these problems. And then what does the Westerners do? They go and they blame the immigrants. Oh, we're getting taken over because of the immigrants. We're getting taken over because, we're letting all this diversity to come to our country. Because they don't ever want to hold themselves accountable, because of their own degeneracy, where they, it's all about preserving themselves and living life to the fullest. How do I attain maximum pleasure? In order to attain maximum pleasure, I think about myself. It's selfishness. Don't have kids, just live your life. And what happens is their population is now going into a decrease, and the convenient thing for them to do is, let's blame the immigrants, let's blame the Muslims, instead of taking any accountability of their own for their actions. So I like to end up with, these people are the last to talk about women's rights, when you literally use women for sexual exploitation purposes. So how dare they talk about Muslim men trying to rape non-Muslims? How dare they talk about sexual perversion in Islam, when these people are the pinnacle of perversion? In fact, Islam is against rape. And anyone caught doing rape according to the Sharia law, they will be stoned to death, killed. This is according to the Sharia court. Now, of course, the Westerner will say, well, what about concubines? You're forcing them and so forth. This is in the context of war and so forth. And this is completely separate from just your day-to-day activities. So with that, I hope I have clarified that for you. Thank you.